So thank you all for coming to our Associate Agreement and Contracts webinar presented by Dr. Incalcaterra. Dr. Incalcaterra has served as the Program Director for the General Practice Residency Program at Lehigh Valley Hospital in Allentown, PA since 1994 and also maintains a private practice in Bethlehem. Dr. Incalcaterra is a member of the Pennsylvania Dental Association, the American Dental Association, 2nd District, and the Lehigh Valley Dental Society. He has served in many leadership positions throughout his membership, most recently as the president of the Pennsylvania Dental Association in 2019 to 2020. He is also a member of the International College of Dentists, Pierre Fauchard Dental Academy, and the American College of Dentists. He's also served as a delegate to the American Dental Association. He has had a lot of experiences with advanced training enrollees and is very knowledgeable in guiding dentists and dental students and new dentists. We are so pleased to have him sharing his knowledge with you tonight as we jump right into tonight's presentation on associate agreements.
All right, well, thank you very much, Amanda, and thank you all for being here tonight. I hope you can hear me well and can see me okay. This is very important for those of you who are going to be looking soon for a new position and signing a contract with a potential practice. And so I always start with the objectives of our lecture, and I want to start with that right now. So by the end of this presentation, you'll have an understanding of the importance of and the reasons for having a written contract, have a better understanding of the different components of the associate contracts, have a better understanding of the difference of being classified as an employee or as an independent contractor, understand the different methods of compensation available to you as an associate, and understand the need for a professional review of all contracts and resources needed for such review. So the written contract has a number of different things that we need to address. And the first thing is the compensation method. Which things might be different ways of compensating you for your care to patients. Any resolution of payments at the termination of the agreement. If any of you are members of Dental Nachos, you often see a lot of controversy about people who are leaving their contracts and then not being paid for their work that they're done at the end. So we need to have that addressed for you as well. The right of you to examine financial records, not only while you're in the practice, but also, after the practice terminates, you may have the ability to see financial records so that make sure you're paid properly for the work that you've done. And any responsibilities you may have in managing the office, whether it's ordering supplies, hiring, firing, things like that. So we want to make sure that's all addressed in the contract. The contract's really designed to protect both the associate and the owner in the case of a dispute. Its idea is to resolve any ambiguity and eliminate confusion, especially with respect to compensation, termination, restrictive covenant, and other duties. And it's really a reminder as to what was agreed to. Rather than having a verbal agreement, you have everything in writing, and then there's really no confusion or any conflict about what was agreed to by both parties of the contract. There are a number of elements that are important in a contract, and we'll go through some of these in a little bit more detail later on, but I'll just highlight these right now. So the first thing is the status of an associate. Are you considered an employee or an independent contractor? And that's very important. We're going to spend some time on that. The schedule and location of the services and duties that you're going to be doing. If you sign up with a practice that has multiple locations, are you going to be assigned to those different locations? What's your schedule going to be like in the different days that you might be at the different locations? Or are you staying in one spot and have a set hours? That's important to be addressed in the contract. Malpractice insurance, who pays for it? Is that a benefit that's given to you, or are you responsible for that? And what other benefits may there be available to you from the practice? The duties of the associate and the owner with regard to on-call schedule, for example. Again, management duties that we might have the associate be responsible for. So those things need to be spelled out as well. Payment method, benefits available. Again, we mentioned that, but how are you compensated? And what methods they use for compensation. Are there benefits available to you? Could be dues and things like that that you may become a member of the ADA or PDA. Are they going to pay for that? And any other business expenses that might come up. For example, lab fees are an important thing that need to be addressed. If there's any special equipment or instruments that you want, who pays for that? Is that paid for by you, or is that paid for by the practice? So these are a number of elements that need to be addressed in a contract. And there's a few more too we're going to discuss next. So the patient charts and records, the ability of the associate to access the records if necessary after you're terminated. And that could either be for financial reasons, as we said, whether you're getting paid for the work that you did, or especially in the case of a potential malpractice suit that you may have to defend. You need to make sure that you have access to those records. So that has to be laid out in the contract as well. Staffing for the associate, especially, are you going to be guaranteed a dental assistant? You'll see some samples of contracts later on that do address that. And you don't often see that, but I think it's important to maybe have that in writing so that you're sure that you're not there just to do hygiene, that you're going to be doing real world dentistry with an associate that will help you. The covenant not to compete or solicit for patients or staff. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but the covenant not to compete is also called the restrictive covenant. And it not only applies to the associate soliciting patients after they leave, but also staff. That's often protected for the practice. Any confidentiality and trade secrets that the practice may have. And that you'll often see that in a contract, and you need to clarify that, especially because it could even be as far as the fees that the practice charges for their procedures. That may be confidential information, and you may just be at a dental meeting one time and say something about that, and that would be a breach of the agreement. So you need to be careful about that. The future status of the associate, as whether they're going to buy in or become a partner or own the practice, and any attorney's fees that may come up with any conflict. That's often addressed in the contract as well. And if there's any questions during this presentation or later on, you can put those into the chat, and we'll try to access those. Amanda may need to read those out to me, so I can answer them as best I can. But please use the chat for now. So which things you should be looking for in the contract? The duration of the contract is very important. Evergreen means that it renews automatically at the end of the contract term. So you sign it once and it just keeps renewing until you finally, one or both of you decide to finalize it. Or a yearly negotiation, is that necessary? So that's an important part of the contract. The names of the parties involved, obviously, if it's a corporate dentistry, if it's a private practitioner that owns the practice, those names need to be spelled out clearly. The hours per day and days that you're working and location. Again, does the practice have more than one location? Are you expected to perform services at all those locations? And that's going to be very important too when we talk about restrictive covenant, because that could change the restrictive covenant if you work in multiple practices. Any responsibility for after hours or weekend coverage. We want to address that. You want to make sure that if you are on call, how is that handled? Is that something that you're doing by phone, or do you physically have to be in the office? And if you have to be in the office, is there going to be some sort of coverage for you, like a dental assistant that will be able to help you in that? And I'm always kind of concerned about any dentist walking into an office without somebody else there, just you and a patient. That's kind of a little bit of an issue that could occur. So you want to make sure that you do have other people in the office with you if you go in after hours. Time off benefits for vacation, for illness, for continuing education. Is this with or without pay? How much advance notice does the practice needs? Those are all things that need to be addressed. Fringe benefits, such as life insurance, health insurance, malpractice insurance, 401k, bonus, CE, dues. If the contract refers to something, it may say something like, you'll enjoy the same benefits as in the employee manual, as all other employees. You want to take a look at that employee manual before you sign the contract, because that's really going to affect how you decide whether you're going to do that or if you want to negotiate those things. So the fringe benefits may be in an employee manual. You want to ask for that at first. How are new patients allocated? If there's multiple doctors, does the main doctor get to pick off the new patients and then, the scraps fall to the associates? Or is there a rotation where every other new patient goes to a different doc? How is that allocated? And then the last thing is that's important is how can the contract be terminated by either party? Do you have to give written notice? Do you have to give a certain day's notice? Um, can you be fired at will? Can you leave the contract because they broke it? A lot of those things need to be addressed. So other things that we are going to talk about, a reasonable restrictive covenant, which is justified with regard to duration and geographic area. So what does that mean? So in a rural area, you might see a very wide restrictive covenant. If there's a lot of practices not in the area, and you may see like a 20-mile restrictive covenant so that you can't practice within that space and compete with the practice that you had just left. In a more urban area, a suburban and urban area, you're going to see a smaller restrictive covenant because there's a lot more dentists, a lot more patients involved. In urban areas, it could be even you might be restricted to within a certain building that you can't practice within that same building. So that all needs to be addressed and make sure that everybody's aware of that restrictive covenant and make sure it's reasonable with regard to geographic area, like I talked about, and how many years. Is it 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year? I'd say typically in the Lehigh Valley, which is where I'm from, I'm up in the Allentown, Bethlehem area, a 5 to 10 mile restrictive covenant. 5 is probably more agreeable. 10 is a little bit long, but 5 is probably reasonable. And 2 years is probably a reasonable restrictive covenant in the Lehigh Valley. And I think for the most part, 2 to 3 years is standard. But again, the geographic location may determine how far out that goes. What I'd recommend is a phased-in restrictive covenant. And what does that mean? So a lot of times when you sign a contract, you may have like a 90-day kind of waiting period. They're going to see how you do and see if you're, working well with the practice, and then they'll say, okay, now you enjoyed all the full benefits. Well, I would argue that within that 90 days, that you also not have a restrictive covenant. Because if they let you go within, say, 30 days, and you really haven't established yourself as a practitioner in the community, but now you're restricted from working in that 2 or 3 year time period for 5 to 10, 20 miles, whatever it may be, that's really not fair if you've only been there for a short term. So if there's a trial period before you start your practice fully with the practice, I would say that there should be a restrictive covenant that's also phased in as well. So that's kind of an important thing too. If you're going to buy in, become a partner in the practice, a specific method of payment to the practice should be stipulated, and a trial period should be specified. So what do I mean by a trial period? So you may say, I'm going to join this practice, and they say, within a year, we're going to offer you the ability to buy into the practice as a partner. And I've seen contracts where they say, within that year, we're going to give you the opportunity to buy in, and then you have a year to make that final decision. So they're really giving you a 2-year period. So that has to be addressed. If there's going to be a buy-in to become a partner, how does that work? And how are you paying for that? Do you have to go out and take a loan to pay for the partnership to buy in? Are they going to take some of that money out of your pay so that you can ease into the partnership too as well? So different ways of being creative with that is important. The space available for the associate, obviously there's going to be operatories, equipment, supplies, and again, we mentioned earlier, assistant. But supplies are important because you may be used to working with particular products and instruments and such like that. So you want to make sure that that's in there as well. How are you being compensated? What's also important is not just your compensation for the work you do, but for hygiene exams, for example. If you go in to do a hygiene exam, do you get the exam fee? Do you get the whole fee for the whole hygiene appointment? Do you get just the x-ray fees, with your exam? So that needs to be discussed with the practice. Any work that needs to be redone. So if you come into the practice and a previous dentist left, and they're going to make you redo the work that was done, oftentimes that may be done for free by, they're not going to charge the patient if something like a crown failed after 2 months, but that doctor's gone and they ask you now to do that crown, how are you getting paid for that? Because you should be paid for your time, even though it's not your responsibility. It's the practice responsibility for the fact that that crown failed, not yours. So you really need to talk about that. Lab fees as well, that's another thing that's important. And any no charge procedures that are done for other practitioners. So let's say another practitioner does a denture, the patient comes back in for a denture adjustment. Is that expected that you do that for free, or is there a compensation for that? So that needs to be discussed as well. Oh, and let me go back one. So the last thing was delineation of chain of command. Again, we talked about this a little bit. Any administrative decisions that the employee may make without the owner's approval, again, should be addressed in there. I'm going to start going into something that's really, really important, and you're going to see quite a bit of reasoning why I'm going to say what I'm going to say. And I will tell you right now, you're going to see contracts where you're considered an employee, and that's truly what you will be. You'll see other contracts where you're going to be asked to be an independent contractor. And I will tell you right now that when you see that at the end of this, that it's unlikely that you really, by IRS rules, can be considered an independent contractor. So in the arrows up top, you'll see the employer controls the process. Okay, the employer buys the supplies. They tell you what materials you're going to use. Okay, they tell you that you're going to border mold a denture with a custom tray. You're going to border mold it. You're going to take the final impression. All this sort of stuff. The independent contractor, the so-called employer, you're not really an employer, but you're a worker. You control the results and the process. So if you're doing a denture as an independent contractor and you decide that I'm not going to use a custom tray, that I'm going to use alginate for my final impression, and that's how I'm going to do that, that's truly what an independent contractor can do. If they tell you you can't use alginate, you have to use a custom tray, you need to border mold, you're an employee because they're telling you how to do this process. Okay. So on the bottom, you'll see that the employer with the employee-employer relationship, the employer sets the direction, the hours, location, purchases supplies, equipment, hires staff, labs, etc. With an independent contractor, you're self-employed. You can set your own hours. You can set your own fees. You can set your own routines. You have independent judgment. You have the ability to bring in your own staff, your own supplies, your own equipment. And again, that's almost really unreasonable to expect that in a dental practice, that you would be truly an independent contractor. So I hope that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea overall what an independent contractor versus an employee is. I'm going to go into that a little bit more. So if this is a yes answer, that means you're an associate. Okay. So does the owner provide instructions? Again, here's the material you're going to use. Must the services be rendered personally by the associate? Yes, they're asking you to do this. Is there a continuing relationship? In other words, are you employed to come in, certain days for a certain time period? Is there a contract that says, you're going to be on this at this job for all this time? And again, a yes is going to mean that you are an employee. Does the owner provide training? Most times they do. Oftentimes they do. Are the services, and sorry, it should say services, not service. In the middle on the bottom, are the services provided by the associated integrated into the business? Or is that independent? Okay, obviously it's integrated into the business. Does the owner set the work hours and schedule? Do they hire, supervise, pay assistants? And is the associate devoting substantially full time to the business of the owner? So again, anything that says yes, that means you're an employee. Continuing on, is the work performed on the owner's premises? So what do I mean by that? I'm going to give you a different example of what an independent contractor could be in a different industry. So I'm a plumber, and you call me up and you say, I'd like my bathroom done. I go, okay, I'm going to come down and take a look at it. I'm going to measure. We're going to do new sinks, new cabinetry, and we're going to install it. Okay. I'm not doing that work. You hired me, but I've got independent contractors. I've contracted out for somebody to build the cabinets. I've contracted out to somebody to put the sinks in the cabinets. I've contracted out for people to install the plumbing and do all of that. So these are independent contractors. You've hired me, but I've hired subcontractors to work for you. So It's not done on the premise, it's done offsite and then brought into the premises. So is it performed on the premises? Yes, then you're an employee. I know it's a weird kind of uh, way of associating this, but that's really what that means. Um, are you are you required to perform these services in an order sequence set by the owner? Again, dentures, there's a certain process you have to go through, a certain, pre-impressions, custom tray, border molding, final impression, trying the wax, trying the teeth, all that. Obviously, there's going to be an order in sequence, and that's industry standard. So yes, that's going to be by the owner as well. And does the owner have the right to discharge the associate at will? I believe that the Pennsylvania is a at-will employer, which means that they can fire you for cause or for not for cause. The employer can just say, you know what, I'm giving you 2 weeks notice, and they don't have to tell you a reason why. If that's the case, then yes, you are an employee. But if they can't do that, then you are not an employee. Do you submit reports? Well, obviously, when you do um, charting, that's a report that's submitted to the owner. So yes, you would be an associate. Is the associate paid by the hour, week, or month? In often cases, it's true. That's the way it's done. And does the owner pay any business or travel expenses for the associate? So once again, all of those mean that you are an employee. So we're going to go over independent contractor now. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. As an independent contractor, you would be supplying your own tools, material, bringing in your own equipment. And that would be that you would be an independent contractor if you're doing it that way. Does the associate provide services to more than one firm or one dental practice at a time? So just like that plumber who's hiring the cabinet maker, that cabinet maker is working for a number of different people building different cabinets for different plumbers. So that's what it means by, are you able to do that for more than one firm, one dental practice at a time? Can the associate terminate their relationship at any time? Unlike an employee where you are contracted and there's a certain way that you can get out of the contract, with a independent contractor, you could just walk out at any time and say, I'm done. So you can't do that as an employee because that's not the way the contract would work. But as an independent contractor, you certainly could do that. Can the associate realize a profit or a loss as a result of their services? That plumber could have quoted me $10,000 to do the job for my bathroom repair and renovation, but it turned out that his cabinets cost more. His people that came in, the sinks cost more than he realized. He lost money on that job. Is that a possibility as an associate? Could you actually lose money while you're working? Well, if you can, yes, you're an independent contractor. If you can't, you're an employee. Do you have any investment in facilities and equipment? We mentioned that already. Are you bringing your own? Are you taking your tools home and autoclaving them? That would be a way of being an independent contractor. Are the services available to the general public? Yes. And do you pay your own Social Security taxes? Now, this is very, very important. The Social Security taxes, when you become an associate, you'll get a paycheck and it'll have your gross amount. Let's say you're paid $10,000 for the month. Just throw out a number, okay? When that occurs, they have to take out state income taxes, federal taxes for Social Security and for Medicare. They take out local taxes. A whole bunch of taxes are going to come out, and you'll see that on your pay stub that they removed taxes from your paycheck. Those taxes are paid by an employer to the state or to the federal government, usually on a quarterly basis. Part of those taxes are the Social Security taxes, which are about 7.65%. So the doctor, if you're an employee, will take 7.65% of that $10,000 out, hold that money and send it to the federal government. Okay. The other half of that money is paid by you when you file your taxes. You pay that other half of that Social Security money. As an independent contractor, you have to pay not the 7.65%, but double that. Okay, you have to pay the 15.3% yourself to the federal government. So you're not paying 7.6%, you're paying 15%, 15.3. For 15.3, right? So, and are you making those payments to the federal government yourself? Usually, as an associate, that is all figured out at the end of the year, and that's when you pay your taxes. As a independent contractor, you have to make those payments quarterly. So that means you have to be either adept at doing taxes or you have to hire an accountant. So there's a real disadvantage to being an independent contractor because your salary is actually going to be lower than what you think it's going to be because you have to pay these additional taxes. I know it's a little bit confusing. I see there's some questions in the chat. We'll get to those later. Um, so we'll, hold on to that. So what types of, again, type of different relationships you have? You have oh, I'm sorry. I just need to go back to this thing. So an employee is protected by federal and state regulations, any discrimination, overtime pay, unemployment compensation. As an employee, you're protected by that. And you have to file your personal taxes yearly. We just said that. An independent contractor, you're not protected by any federal, state regulations, anti-discrimination, overtime pay, unemployment, etc. And you must file monthly or quarterly taxes. So that's a very important key difference. So what types of associates? Okay, we kind of went over the first two. The top was where you're an employee, you're an independent contractor. There could be a buy-in where after a time period, as I mentioned earlier, the associate has the ability to buy into the practice as a partner, one of many partners or equal partner, however you want to do that, depending on the number of doctors working in the practice. And again, it's usually after a trial period. That trial period could be a year, 18 months. And then after that time, you agree to do the buy-in and you determine how that's money is going to be paid to the practice, whether again, you have to get a loan or they're going to take that money out of your salary to help you buy in. And then you have to have a buy-in agreement. Okay. And similar to that is the buyout, where the associate buys the entire practice. And that could be an immediate thing where you come into a practice and you just buy the practice completely. Or you might come in as an associate and agree that after 6 months, a year, that the owner dentist is going to retire and you're going to buy out that entire practice. So the important thing about that is it's important to get an appraisal of the practice. That's really essential if you're either going to buy in as a partner or going to buy the practice out. And then determine how the final practice price is determined. If it's based on you're there a year, and let's say you've popped the amount of money that practice brings in by 200,000. Let's say they were making 500,000. You're there now, they're making $700,000. Well, if you buy that practice valued at $700,000 because that's what they're making now, you're the only reason that it is at $700,000. Okay, it was $500,000 before you got there. That's really the true value of the practice. So my recommendation is that if you're doing a buy-in or a buyout, you determine the practice at the time that you get there, not after you've been there and contributing to the practice's success. Because that's, again, you're going to be paying for your own work that you've contributed to the practice. And I think that's not right. So the valuation of the practice should be established before you begin working there. All right, different methods of compensation. There's a straight salary. So you come in and I'm going to pay you, I don't know, $5,000 every 2 weeks. And that means you're going to get 10,000 a month. You're getting 120,000 a year. Maybe that's low, maybe that's high. Depends. You can determine that yourself. But I'm going to give you a salary for a few months. And what that does is allow you to say, all right, I don't have to worry about producing and the collections at the front desk. I need to just kind of go in, work, and I'm going to get paid. I can pay some of my moving expenses. I can pay some of my student loans. I can buy health insurance if I need to. You have that money that's kind of guaranteed. So that relieves a lot of tension for a new associate just doing a straight salary. On the bottom, though, it says there's little to no incentive for a high level of production. You could come in and sit there all day and you're getting paid a salary and not really being, quick about doing a crown prep. You could take 2.5 hours, or you could do it 1 hour and 15 minutes. You're going to get paid the same. So from a practice standpoint, there's less incentive for that new employee to really be productive. So that's why maybe only for a few months that straight salary may be workable. The next line is the straight salary with a commission. So what a commission occurs is they determine how much they're going to pay you, and if you meet certain goals, you'll make a bonus on top of that. So that provides a little bit more incentive for you to work harder because yes, I have the financial security of having a salary, but if I really want to make some more money, I'm going to work harder because I'm going to get a quarterly, semi-annual, or an annual bonus. Usually it's quarterly, sometimes monthly, but usually quarterly. So that's a way of also getting compensated. And then there's payment by commission. So the commission is either based on production on the bottom or collections. And so it's a percentage. So I would say, I'm just going to use the number 30% for both. Okay. So for production, it's the work that you produce based on the practice's fees for those procedures, and you get a percentage of that. That truly is the easiest way for you and the practice to determine your salary if you're on a commission. The reason is because on collections, the money comes in drabs. Sometimes it's collected at the front desk. Sometimes there's insurance that has to be processed. Sometimes there's two insurances that have to be processed. Sometimes a patient says, oh, I forgot my checkbook, send me a bill. Now you're chasing after all this money. So you can be paid on production, which means that at the end of the day, you know how much money you produce for the practice, and you're going to get a percentage of that. Not that day, but over the time period, maybe it's every 2 weeks. That's very simple, easy for you to figure out, easy for the practice to figure out. Collections is a lot more complicated, as I mentioned earlier. Now, if you have a practice that doesn't do any insurance and they collect all their fees up front, it's golden. There's no problem there, but that's very rare and very unusual. So for the most part, collections are going to be based on the money that comes in over time. And it's a little bit complicated to manage that. How do you know that Mrs. Jones, where you did that crown 3 weeks ago, did she pay her money up front, her copay? Did the insurance money come in yet? Is there a discrepancy? Do we have to go after her? Do we? So it's very, very difficult to manage collections. Obviously, with computer software, you can not easily, but you can track down that money. But on a basis of production, it's usually a lot easier for you. Now, I will tell you also that there is a slight difference. If I said collections at 30%, in my practice, I would say production will be 25%, because I know I've got to put that money out to you, whether that money is paid to me or not. So you produce a crown, it's $1,500. I owe you 25% of that $1,500. I don't have time to worry about collection. It's up to me to collect that money, but you're getting paid no matter what. So sometimes production is paid at a lower rate than collections because there's more of a guarantee for you, but more of a risk for the practice. I hope that kind of makes sense. So the little salary on the bottom, you can do that to determine what your production should be. So you take your desired income, divide it by the compensation rate and the practice's collection rate. This is again under collections. So the salary formula is for under collections, if you're paid on collections. So you can do that. So, if you want to make $200,000, what's the compensation rate? Divide it by, let's say it's 30%, divided by 30 times the practice's collection rate. What do I mean by that? So does the practice collect 100% of the money that they charge? Or does Mrs. Jones, who forgot her checkbook, forget to pay her bill? And eventually they write that off. So they're not collecting 100%, they're collecting 98%. Did the insurance create a problem where patient thought they had insurance and the practice didn't check to see if they had insurance, and they don't? So now you're not collecting that money because now the patient's like, hey, I told you I had insurance, that's not my problem. It is, but they won't admit that. So now the practice is maybe collecting 95% of their fees. So you have to kind of look at what the practice's collection rate. When we talk about interviews, if you're on next week with interviews, we're going to talk about that important aspect of the interview as well, because you really need to know how well the practice is doing in their ability to collect. All right. Net profits method. This is similar to the collections or production method. So it's the amount of collected minus expenses such as lab bills. So let's say there's a $5,000 case, $500 is lab fees. So that knocks the whole profit down to $4,500, and they'll pay you on a percentage of that. You can typically negotiate that the practice pays a percent of the lab fee in line with your collection rate. So you're getting 33% collections, you pay 33% of the lab fee and the practice pays the balance, the 67% of the lab fee. If it's 30, you pay 30% of the lab fee, the practice pays 70%. So that's how it should work in a fair method for when it comes to lab fees. It's usually a split based on how much money you're being paid on based on the collections. But in the case above, that $500 is coming right off the top. So we're not saying it's $5,000 and you're paying 30% of the lab fee. You're saying it's $5,000. You have to pay the whole lab fee, and now what's left over is the $4,500 that you're getting paid. So I hope that that's a little bit not too confusing again. Advance is a loan against for future earnings. This is almost like the salary that we talked about, but it's slightly different. So, for example, the month you'll see that there's a $5,000 example that the first month they're going to advance you 5,000. They only collect 4,000, so you owe the practice 1,000. Owe on paper. Okay, you're getting that 5,000, but they know they only got 4,000 for that, so you you still need to be able to earn that extra 1,000. The second month you're at 6,000, you're still paid 5,000 because that's what the agreement was, and that makes up for the $1,000 that wasn't paid the first month, wasn't collected the first month. And the third month at 7,000, again, they're going to again pay you 5,000 and bank that $2,000 toward future pay. So it goes on and on. There should be a time limit on this. There should be just a short finite time limit, but this is a nice way of, again, a new dentist starting out and perhaps having some money that's in a sense guaranteed, but it has to be balanced out at the end, that the practice make sure that they're not paying you over what they're bringing in. So this is an important thing about the collections method. So an indemnity practice, and that's one that does not accept a lot of insurance contracts. Okay, they're not taking a lot of PPOs. They're not taking a lot of reduced fee insurance companies. So an indemnity practice is one that let's say you have Delta Dental, and Delta only pays $800 for a crown. I don't accept Delta. Okay, so my crown fee is $1,500. You can get the $800 from your Delta insurance patient. You can get that yourself, but you need to pay me the full $1,500 for me to get this case done. Okay, so you're going to have more patients paying their full fee in an indemnity practice versus one that accepts a lot of insurances. So as a result, you're paid more for the work that you do, whether it's on production or payment as collected. In a practice which participates in many different types of insurance plans, they're going to have a lower collection rate because the fees from the insurance companies are going to be lower. You may have limits on what you can charge the patient. As I said, it might be an $800 crown from Delta. You participate with Delta. Unfortunately, you can't charge them the difference, that $700 difference that you lost. So you're only going to get paid that $800, and you're only going to get a percentage of that. And with Delta, a lot of times the patient has a copay that they have to pay. And again, it's important for the collections that I mentioned earlier about the rate of collections for practices, because if they're not collecting that $400 from the patient up front, there's a good chance that he may not get it later on. So a good practice will say to the patient, Mrs. Jones, we participate with Delta. They're only allowing $800. We're accepting that. That's fine. However, your fee is $400. How would you like to pay that today before we get started? Okay, that's the way it should go. Not that, Mrs. Jones, we're going to get the $400 from the insurance company. As soon as that check comes in, we'll bill you for the balance. Now you're waiting a month for the insurance to come in. You're waiting a month or so for Mrs. Jones to pay. So again, when you have a practice that participates in a lot of different insurance plans, your compensation is going to be lower because the practice is not going to be collecting. They're going to be accepting a lot less of fees. So in a summary, then, collection method is dependent on the ability to convince the patient of the needed care and to deliver it, the competence of the practice to collect the fees, and the success rate of the office the office staff to again have those financial policies in place. Mrs. Jones, how are you going to pay for that today before we get started? Okay, or Mrs. Jones, when you come in and we start that crown, we need that $400 up front, whatever it is. So it's very dependent upon not only the insurances, but also the ability of the staff to do the right thing and collect the monies up front. So weigh the benefits, going back to the independent contractor versus being an employee. Independent contractors have to pay their own Social Security tax, again, almost 7.5% more than if you were an employee. And you have to file with the IRS yourself, either by doing it yourself or hiring an accountant. But if that practice offers you a lot of things that you really find attractive and that you really like, then you have to weigh that, whether they're going to call you an independent contractor. You know what, I really love this practice, their fees are high. You know, I'm going to get paid more, they don't accept insurances. Yeah, I'll accept paying the extra 7.5% because I know I'm going to do well. And yeah, I'll hire an accountant to do my taxes. It's a great practice, I love it. That's the only thing that's a little bit down, but I can overlook that, okay? The compensation method, look for the availability of healthcare plans for your family if you need that. If you don't have a family and you don't need a lot of um, benefits for your family, then maybe it's worth having a lower compensation method because you don't have to have that extra pressure of buying insurance for your family. So, but if they have it available, then maybe okay, I'll take a little lower. That's okay because I'm getting healthcare, I'm getting a CE benefit, they have a retirement plan, they have paid time off, etc. Okay. So you have to kind of weigh out everything on and determine, yeah, I might be getting paid a little less with the compensation method, but they've got great benefits, and I really think that's important for me. So maybe I'll accept that little lower amount. All right. So before you sign, this is really, really important. You know, I'm giving you a lot of advice, and you can probably see this in any lecture that you go to. But when it comes down to the details, and there's a lot of legalese in these contracts, get an attorney who's familiar with the contract law. It's really important that you spend that money. It's money well worth being spent. If there's things that you don't like with the contract, you can try to negotiate that out ahead of time before it goes to the attorney. So for example, we talked about a phased-in restrictive covenant. You may be able to negotiate with the practice, hey, you know, I'm on a 90-day trial period. I want a 90-day waiver of that restrictive covenant. You can do that all yourself. When you get the final document down, send it to your attorney, ask them to look over, see if there's anything that you've missed, that you know that is a red flag that you can't even see because we don't know their language. They don't know what an MOD amalgam is or a PFM crown. They don't understand that. We don't understand the legalese that the attorneys have. So most of us don't. Again, ability for you to negotiate, whether it's your salary, your hours, your on-call duties, you know, the restrictive covenants, some of those things. Feel free to try that because sometimes it might be a new dentist that, I'm sorry, an older dentist who hasn't had a lot of experience with this. This is their first time doing this. They may not really be familiar with some of the things that I'm telling you tonight. So, you know, feel free to negotiate. They can only say no, and you're no worse off, you know. So they might say yes, and then it's better. So go ahead and negotiate. Again, if you're contemplating a buy-in or a buyout, the practice appraisal is essential. That will probably cost you around, I just had my practice appraised recently, I think it was around $2,500 or $3,000. Again, a significant amount of money, but if you're going to protect yourself and make sure that the value of that practice is done properly, and don't use the practice appraisal that the owner gives you. Ask for all the documentation that you need. You know, you're going to need their 1099 forms from the IRS for the last couple of years. You're going to need profit and loss statement, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to have a lot of information and get that appraisal done independently of an appraisal that was done by the practice, because you're going to come up with two different numbers. And it's going to be important that you use those two numbers to negotiate a final fee for that practice. So that's an important part as well. All right, I'm going to go through a bunch of contracts, and there's a lot of stuff on here. There's a lot of,
네,
hello? Okay, there's a lot of information on here. I'm going to just kind of try to highlight some of the things that are important. So you'll see the highlight there where it says the clause in this contract notes that the employee would be accepted to accept the practices, burdens, and responsibilities. So you'll see in red, this is contracts that the residents have given me over the years. I mentioned earlier that I was program director at Lehigh Valley Health Network at the Allentown site, the 17th and 2 Street site. I did that for 27 years, and I had residents coming to me with different contracts, and I'd look them over, and I'd see these little red flags. I'm like, what does that mean? What's these burdens and responsibilities? So when you see stuff like that, um, do they mean administrative duties? Do they have other responsibilities that you're responsible for? So you need to really be clear in the contract as to exactly what they're talking about. This one, as an employee, you'll be involved at least initially on a part-time basis in this practice. You'll be expected to have evening and Saturday hours and participate equally in the call schedule. Um, you know, is it fair that you're a part-timer, but you have to equally share in the schedule for the on-call? So there's full-time dentists and there's part-time dentists in this practice, and you're being told that you've got to do exactly what they're doing, even though you're only part-time. And being on call isn't always a burden. Sometimes that helps you because you can get paid for that. You can bring a new patient into the practice. So you make sure that it's spelled out in the contract that what your compensation will be for those on call. Is it office visit after hours? Is it emergency care? Is it the X-rays? Is it everything you do um, to make sure that that's clear? And again, if you're going to get called in at 2 o'clock in the morning, do you have to come in, or can you handle over the phone? There are a lot of things that are really important when you see this. So just be careful. This one's very, very complicated, and I just want to make sure that I have the right things. So it says on item number 4, I'm not sure if you can see the top of the page. It says the host or owner will make records available upon request following termination of the contract. That's really beneficial in a number of ways. It allows you to continue to get paid after termination of the contract, and you can ask for those copies of those financial records. And again, if there's a lawsuit, you'll need to have access to records after you've left the practice, if you do, so that you can defend yourself. This one here on item number 5, there's a clause in there. It says this section refers to making the schedule of hours that is acceptable to both the host or owner and the associate. Rather than doing that, again, I think it'd be really beneficial to have those hours laid out in the schedule, in the contract. And that can be changed, and you can modify the contract. You could addend the contract if there's a change in the future. But rather than saying, let's negotiate this after we sign this contract, no, let's set it out in the contract. Let's have that spelled out exactly. 8A, so host, again, owner, shall pay the associate as full consideration, 30% of the amount collected calculated per month. The owner shall pay the associate for clinical services rendered while you're actively employed by the owner. No payments, including commission payments, shall be paid after the date the associate leaves. And you'll see my little comment there. I thought not paying someone for their work was illegal. So a better solution that I recommended to the resident, that you'll get paid for any work after you leave up to 30 or 60 days or 90 days if you want post-employment. Again, if you have an office that's doing a lot of billing, waiting for insurances, you leave on March 19th, they're saying whatever money comes in after March 19th based on what you did is ours, not yours. Okay, not fair, really not fair. And then 8B is the practice is paying for all lab fees, which I thought was good, considering that they were paying 30% of collections. And my other question on this to the resident was, are these fees enough for you to be able to support your family and such on this 30%? Are they participating with Medicaid, which pays like 30 cents on the dollar? Or are they participating is it an indemnity practice? So again, most important that you take a look at those different things. Facility, again, they use this word host, which I hate. Host owner agrees to provide suitable treatment facilities that are appropriate for the performance of duties, furniture, fixtures, instruments, supplies, records, personnel on the premises during the agreement. So personnel means chairside dental assistant. That was very good. Okay, there's some stuff in this contract I didn't like. Stuff I do like. That was very good. It spells it out for you. You're going to pay for your own life, disability insurance, professional dues, fees and dues. It doesn't address medical insurance, pension plan, incentive bonuses, etc. So I asked the resident to take a look and see if those are things that are available to the associate. Again, a little hard to read. I'll just kind of explain 14A. I was just pointing out to the resident that a phased-in restrictive covenant is best. This was a 2-year, 4-mile, so that's reasonable. But again, I just like the fact that it's a phased-in would be better. Item B on number 14, I asked if the resident was working in multiple offices. I mentioned this earlier, and I'll kind of go back to this now. So you're working in an office. I'll use the Lehigh Valley. If you know the Lehigh Valley, it's pretty spread out. There's Easton is a big city in the east part of the valley. Allentown's a big city in the western part of the county. So if they've got an office in Easton and they put you in that office for a few days and you have a 10-mile restrictive covenant, now they put you in the Allentown office for a couple of days. That restrictive covenant is now 10 miles. Now you've got 2 restrictive covenants that are probably going to overlap, but it's also spreading into New Jersey and out toward maybe toward Hamburg, okay, out further west. So when they say that you have a location, and it says here the premises shall include any office location the associate has practiced dentistry under these terms. That's a little bit of a red flag because that's going to spread out your restrictive covenant, and that's not so great. 14C, in this particular case, the resident wanted to work at a federally qualified health center part-time. So I just pointed out that this was allowed in the contract. I thought that was good for the resident. And then item 14D, it says, and I'll have to, it says 4 years. If you look at about the second black line from the bottom on the left of 14D, you'll see it says 4 years. But it was 2 years in a restrictive covenant. So that's inconsistent. So they need to make sure that they're consistent in this contract with the 2 years, whether it's 2 years or 4 years, it should be consistent on the top and in the bottom, as far as soliciting patients or soliciting employees. All right. Again, item E, same thing. This said for soliciting staff, it was 4 years. It should be consistent with the restrictive covenant. So just a few things that you can look at that are a little difficult. This one was a huge red flag, and I'll tell you, it did not work out very well for the associate. So the associate acknowledges that the owner does not guarantee to provide a specific number of hours per work to the associate, that no specific amount of time is guaranteed or promised to the associate, and the owner agrees to use a reasonable effort to provide business to the associate based on the owner's overflow. That is so much a red flag. Where I'm hiring you, but I'm not guaranteeing that I'm going to give you any patients. I'm not going to guarantee that you'll have any hours to work. I don't care about your family. I don't care about you. I'm going to do what I want. Okay. So you sitting around twiddling your thumbs, waiting for a patient to walk in. But you know what? The owner says, oh, I want that patient. That's my patient. You'll maybe get the next one. So I told this resident that this is really, really bad. Don't sign this contract. Unfortunately, they did. And what I kind of predicted came true. The resident couldn't even afford to support his family. So that ended that. Again, assignment of patients, the owner shall direct and control the patients assigned to the associate, made by the sole discretion of the owner. Again, you'll see this all in highlight. Again, I thought, again, a nice way to go would be to every other new patient that comes in. And I can see a patient, maybe a friend of the owner, met him at an event or is a neighbor and they want to come and see the owner. That's fine. But a new patient walking in off the street or calling on the phone really should be assigned every other doc. Again, this was the same one where the doctor wasn't going to guarantee any patients. He had a 20-mile restrictive covenant in this area. So I said, for this region, this 20 miles is excessive. It may not hold up in court if you ever challenge it. The problem with challenging it in court is you'd probably win, but now you're going to get an attorney and take time away from your practice to go to court and fight this whole thing. So again, I recommend this resident not sign that, but unfortunately they did. So again, in the Allentown area, Lehigh Valley area, a 5 miles probably acceptable. The 20-mile is way out there. All right, this one was the trial period. Again, you'll see that this was a 90-day trial period. And in the highlights, you'll see, in the event this agreement is terminated within the 90 days, the restrictive covenant shall not be applied and to be null and void. I thought that was really, really good. This is exactly what I'd love to see in any contract that you have. If there's going to be a trial period, they should exclude that restrictive covenant during that time. You're not going to take patients if you work for them for 30 days and you set up the practice next door. The patients don't know you. Okay, they don't have allegiance to you, they have allegiance to the practice, hopefully. So if that's the case and they do go to you, that's a bad practice to be in the first place. If I had a patient that left my office because you worked for me for 30 days and then you set up in the building next door, I'd look at my practice and go, what am I doing wrong? So they shouldn't be so paranoid about this. The partnership clause, again, this is good because they said at the following expiration of 1 year from the date of this agreement, the owner may invite the associate to become a partner in the practice. If that's the case, they have until the second year in that second paragraph to determine if they're going to do that. So in other words, the doctor could say, all right, a year's up. I'm going to offer you to buy into the practice. You have another year to decide if you're going to do that. Okay. What I thought was very good was that the associate agrees to pay owner the same percentage of the value of the practice at the time of commencement of this agreement. Mentioned that before. You've got a practice that's doing 500,000. You build it up to 700,000. The doc says practice is worth $700,000. You want to buy it? That's what it's going to cost you. No, because I brought that up there. So I'm going to tell you that right now, it was worth $500,000 when I walked in. That's what I'll be willing to pay you for it. So again, it's nice to see these in writing, some of the examples I talked about. So this one gets a little complicated, but this is sort of a one of those percentage with a bonus. So what they're saying is that you get 30% of collections up to $70,000. Between $70,000 and $104,000, they would pay you 35%. So you're going to get your 30% of the 70,000, and then between 70, so the next 34,000, you would get 35% of collections. And when you go above 104,000, you'll get 40% of that excess above the $104,000. So you have three different pay levels going on here. But that's an incentive for you to produce more, and you'll get paid a higher percentage if they do more collections. So basically what they were doing in this contract, and you'll see at the bottom, it says you're guaranteed a salary of $1,750. They said they would do $3,500 every 2 weeks as a draw, but he has to be sure that you're making at least that much in order to pay you that salary. If you make more than the $1,750 per week over the quarter, he'll pay you the extra. If you make less, he'll continue to offset it by continuing to pay the $1,750, but will monitor your collection in the future so that they may, eventually come to a point where he's either underpaid you and has to make up for that, or he's overpaid you and you have to pay him back for the balance. So that one, again, a little bit complicated there. All right. So this one allowed the employee to be granted limited access to the business records of the employee of the employer for a period of 365 days following termination in order to verify his compensation has been accurately paid. That was really generous. Again, I could see a reasonable doc saying 60, 90 days because that's when most of our collections are coming in. This doctor was very generous and said that they could have up to a year to check the records, financial records. Pretty unusual, but very, very generous, I thought. Medical, again, after a vesting period required under the employee's health and welfare plan, the employer will provide to the employees at the employee's cost. I'm sorry, at the employer's cost, except for 20% for medical. So the vesting period, it mentions vesting period. What is that? A vesting period is that you have to work a certain number of months, years, or whatever in order for you to be eligible for those benefits. So in this case, I said to the resident, if your spouse gets medical coverage, it's not a big deal. But if you're depending on his plan, you need to know what the vesting period is. So you can tell your spouse, hey, we're going to have to buy insurance for a year. And then a year from now, they're going to allow me to be vested into the practice so I can get this benefit. Okay. And again, sometimes this information is provided in the employee manual. Same thing with this one, the 401k, the simple IRA, pension benefits. They talk about a vesting period, so find out what that vesting period is. I think that comes to the end of my presentation for the most part. We had shown you a number of slides of different samples of contracts, and you can see a lot of the difference that were there in different contracts. So important, again, to review these with a fine-tooth comb, look for some of the things that might be red flags, try to negotiate those out, get an attorney to review the contract when you're happy with it. And again, if you're going to buy in, to make sure that you get a appraisal that based on the practice when you start. Number of different resources that I use for this: Building Successful Associates. This was the ADA Council on Dental Practice. I'll tell you, some of these are quite old. I'm not sure if these practice guidelines are still out there. The IRS website, when we talked about it, this difference between independent contractor and employee. Dr. Phil Cooper, I have no relationship to him. He has a practice consultant program I think he's in South Jersey, and he has a guide. So you could reach out to him and ask him for the guide. A lot of the information that I took was in this guide, but he sends those out for free. Obviously, he's looking for you to perhaps go to him when you want to negotiate buying or becoming an associate. So he does that as his business, but he has a lot of good information. And then just about less than a year ago, I don't know if you get the ADA New Dentist blog or if you have access to that, but if you do, I'd ask you to subscribe to this. This Kaylee Selesky had a really nice article, fairly short, maybe 1 or 2 pages, about what to look for in a practice, and how to make contacts with people so that you get your name out there. I just thought it was very good. So these are some of the resources that I use.